And we are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and today we are going to talk about another Dice Throne hero. We are doing the full review and analysis for how to play Huntress. Now, I want to get a few things out of the way here up front. First, I'm only going to be dealing with the version of Huntress after the 2022 pamphlet update. Any strategies that pertain to previous versions of the character, we're not going to deal with here today. Second, this is primarily going to be coming at it from the perspective of a competitive player trying to get better at tournament play of Huntress. If you're a casual player just having fun with your friends at the kitchen table on Friday nights, you're of course welcome here too, and there may be some things that can help improve your gameplay, maybe squeeze a few more wins out of those fun multiplayer games. But if some of the details I get into feel like it's a little more than you want, that's totally acceptable too. Not everybody has to play the game in a hardcore way, but that is going to be the kind of approach I take with this particular video. Lastly, I want to put it on the table right up front that I have some bias around this character. Aesthetically, this is maybe my favorite character in the whole game. Up there, in my like top three in terms of the art, the look, the idea of how the character works, all that stuff I love a lot. Unfortunately, the actual mechanics of playing Huntress fell a little short from my personal playstyle. Now, again, there are different in the same way that there are different types of players between like a kitchen table person and a tournament person, there are different styles of player. I am a particular style of player, so my perspective is going to be shot through on this whole thing. If some of the things that I point to and say, "Oh, I really don't like that," if in your play style you really enjoy playing that way, well, feel free to ignore me on that point. That's okay too. It takes all types to make the world go round. Hopefully, there's something of value in this video, even if you're a different type of player or enjoy a different type of play style from me. All right, with all of that stuff out of the way, we're going to dive into one of the most interesting and unique characters in Dice Throne. We're going to start by taking a look at the Huntress's pamphlet. Now, there's some familiar stuff on here, but there's also a lot going on. So we are going to zoom in a little closer and we're going to read through this pamphlet, starting with Nera. Now, this is the unique mechanic. This is the thing about Huntress that makes her Huntress. Everything about the character hinges around the fact that she has a cat. She's got a pet that's there with her and is going to help her do battle in a whole bunch of different ways. So let's read through this whole thing and then we can do a little bit of analysis. But once we get into the abilities, some of this will be more clear. All right, so Nyra has a maximum of 7 health. She starts out at 5. If you're being attacked while Nyra is active, you can choose to pass the full amount of damage to Nyra instead. You can do this at any point. So I can say, okay, I'm going to take all your damage, and then you go, aha, I'm going to play a dice fix or an attack mod that's going to increase that damage by 5 points. I can go, okay, I'm going to send it to the cat instead. And the Huntress always has the last word on that. There is no gotcha where you can force the Huntress to take damage. If Nyra is up, she can, at the end of both players doing all their stuff, send that damage to Nyra. In tournament play, this distinction is very important, probably a little bit less relevant at the kitchen table. Okay, if Nera receives damage, you may still use your defensive ability. If Nera is active on your offensive roll phase, results in an attack, increase that attack by 2 damage. This is extremely valuable. This is one of the most important reasons why we want Nera up all the time. Once we get to the Huntress's board, you'll definitely be able to tell there's some issues with those damage numbers if you don't consistently have that 2 from Nera active as well. Also, you may deal 1 damage to Nera during your offensive roll phase to reroll 1 die. You only get to do it once per turn. This doesn't feel very strong, but given how awkward Huntress's roll objectives are and her die faces are, this reroll ability is actually really important and will be very relevant. All right, moving down to Nera's Bond. Now, this is another unique element to Huntress as a character. This bond lets you do a couple of things. You can, if you're attacked while you have a bond, spend it, and then at that point you can split the damage between Huntress and Nera. This is something you do want to do, and you want to do it kind of aggressively. So your stack limit on the bond is 1, but there's a bunch of powers and like ways that you can generate more bonds with Huntress. If you do one of those abilities and you already have a bond, it's just wasted. Now, you can spend it at any time to heal Nyra, but if Nyra's at full health, there's nothing for that bond to do. So anytime you can, you should pop the bond and try to send as much damage into Nera as you can afford. Ideally, you want to keep her probably at 1 or 2. If you're trying to maximize value, and let's say she's at 7 health, you're trying to maximize value. You've got a 8 attack coming at you. You send 6 of that into Nera, leaving her at 1. The other option would be maybe you leave her at 2, because that way going into your next turn you'll have the ability to re-roll one of your dice in your offensive roll phase because of the ping damage you can put into Nera. So again, while it may be tempting to think about the bond as something that you hold on to until just the right moment so you can make sure you can always split damage, really spending through these aggressively, I think, is the correct play. Because you're going to get more of them, and it's so annoying anytime you try to gain a status effect and you can't. So next, let's take a look at Bleed. Now, this is a status effect we've talked about on the channel before. It's across a bunch of different characters. It is probably deserving the distinction of the worst damage over time status effect you can get. It deals 1 damage at the start of somebody's, or during the upkeep, as long as somebody rolls a 1 through 4. If they roll a 5 or a 6, they stop the bleeding and the status effect is removed. There's no good way to really put a value on bleeds because it can be. I've had games where I've applied bleed 5 or 6 times and they've dealt a total of 0 damage, and I've had games where I've applied 1 bleed that has dealt 5 or 6 damage. So it's a very inconsistent status effect. It's not worthless, but it's just so unreliable that I don't think you should make bleed a core part of your game plan when playing Huntress. On a character like Vampire Lord, who gets all the added bonus, added value out of applying bleeds, sure, it makes sense there. For Huntress, the only value you're going to get out of these is what the bleed token actually does, the little bits of damage. And that's unreliable at best. So, not a big fan of the status effect on this particular hero. Looking at her die faces, we have one of the more awkward die faces, and once we take a look at her board, it's only going to get more awkward. So this is the 2211 die face. So we have 2 spears, 2 claws, the bond symbol, and then the cat symbol on the 6. These 2211 is awkward with a lot of characters. It feels punishing with Huntress, but we'll get to that here in a moment. All right, next we're going to take a look at the complete character board. Now, I say the same thing every time we do this. Gosh, isn't it gorgeous? But in this case, it's even more gorgeous. One particular element I really like on the board is in the central figures, the way Nera and Huntress are kind of lined up and they almost share eyes. So as always, shout out to Manny for making some of the most gorgeous game pieces for us to play this fantastic game with. All right, we're going to go ahead and zoom in on the board, and let's start taking a look at some of Huntress's powers. So Animalistic. As far as a basic attack, 345 is pure garbage. It's really bad. It's bad. If you consider Nera, and we're going to have to repeat this a bunch throughout this, basically anytime we're reading a damage value, add 2 to it, assuming Nera is up. But even there, we're looking at 5, 6, 7, which is not great. Remember, I like to see 7 points of damage, 8 points of damage in that range every turn. That's the damage output I want from my character. This is a maximum roll basic attack, gets us to a floor of 7 damage, and she's going to have an even harder time rolling the maximum amount basic attacks than most characters do because she's only got 2 spears instead of the 3 basic attack die facing like many heroes in Dice Throne do. So this is not a power I'm thrilled with. Yes, sometimes you will have to take it because it's the only thing you get, but as far as basic attacks go, this is one of the least attractive basic attacks in the entire game. Looking at Animalistic, this becomes a 4/5/6 with a vanishingly small chance to add a bleed. Considering Nera damage, that becomes 6, 7, 8. The damage numbers on there look a little bit better, but we're talking about 2 combat points plus a whole card to get maybe 1 more damage on an ability you don't really want to be rolling for. I think this is an easy and automatic sell in basically all possible game scenarios with Huntress. I can't see really ever wanting to play this card. Okay, moving down to Resuscitate. Now, this is an interesting power. So, there are abilities in Dice Throne that you would activate every single turn if you could. We generally think of them as being really good. And there's abilities that you mostly never want, and this one kind of falls into that category, except for when you want it, you absolutely critically need it. No exception. So if Nyra is down, rolling a resuscitate gets you a bond and it gets you 3 health. Now, this is actually a crucial value because the way the Nyra mechanics work, if she gets reduced to 0 HP, you flip her token over, and then each round at the start of your upkeep, she heals 1. Once she's healed up to 5, she flips back over. So resuscitate as a power allows you to essentially take your offensive roll phase off of doing damage to your opponent to just deal with getting your cat back on her feet. The times where you want that, it is absolutely mission critical to get it. You cannot leave Nera down for multiple turns as Huntress if you want to win games. So if you had to put her down because a big attack came in and it was like, well, I can take 15 damage or I can just put it all into the cat. Sometimes you just have to put it all into the cat. But then you take your next turn to heal her back up and get yourself taken care of. Those are the moments where you want Resuscitate. Uh, Generally speaking, I would prefer to go my whole game without ever having to use Resuscitate because that means my cat never went down. But once the cat is down, if you got to get her back up, Resuscitate is the cleanest, easiest way to do that. Once we look at the upgrade, this costs 2 combat points. It still gives you a bond, but it gives you the ability to heal Nera for even more. So the base, you'd have to have 2 5s in order to trigger this ability at all. So it's going to be a base healing of 4 guaranteed. But if you're able to roll more 5s, potentially you can get Nera healed up even more without having to use the bond to do that and get her flipped. Again, the best games with Huntress are the games where you don't have to resuscitate at all. So do I want to upgrade an ability that I at most only want to have to use once? That feels tough, especially with a character who has such a rough economy option. She's not drawing a lot of extra cards. She's not gaining a lot of extra combat points. It's hard for me to commit to this upgrade, even though this is a legitimate upgrade over the base. Like the value you get out of this is good, but the value you have to invest compared to the number of times you want to be activating this power, I can't call this an automatic sell, but this is definitely a card that I don't find myself playing very often. It's If you're getting a lot of value out of this upgrade, it probably means you're losing the game because Nera's down turn after turn, and we don't want that. So probably a sell. All right, moving on to Savage. All right, so you need 3 3s or 4s and a 6. This is going to deal 4 damage plus a rider die, which can turn it to 5 damage, turn it to 6 damage, gain a bond, or inflict a bleed. Also add 2 more damage to that, so we could be looking as much as 8 damage out of here with some utility options depending upon what happens. This is going to be a power you want to activate. This is going to be a power you want to activate in most matchups throughout the game. It's quite good. This is probably a bread and butter power, given how much damage you're able to output with it while Nera is up, and the fact that even if you don't get maximum damage, you still get other things that can advance your game plan. Obviously, rolling the 6 is the thing I want least here. If I have a bond, I'd probably spend it to try to make room for the new one. Fortunately, you can spend them at instant speed, and as long as Nera has some damage on her, that value isn't wasted. So this is a great power. I like this ability a lot. The problem is it requires a 6 and then 3 of these 2 die face results as well. So your roll chances, like it's awkward to roll for. Looking at the upgrade, which costs 2 combat points, I'll start with the Rider ability, Inflict a Bleed, and 3 defendable damage. That is barely better than a whiff, and against certain defenses, it is actually worse than a whiff. That is a terrible backup ability. Looking at what it does to the ability we actually care about, it increases the damage by 1. Is that enough? Even in the games, like even though this is a power we want to use a lot, is that enough? I'm not convinced that this is an upgrade I generally want to play. Maybe you could justify it to yourself if you have a surplus of combat points and nothing to do with them. Maybe. I think generally I'm probably going to sell this upgrade. and try to use the combat points I get from it to pay for things like Twice as Wild, Not This Time, and like the generic use utility cards. Even though this is a really good power, I think this is a really good power, but I'm not sure that the upgrade brings enough value to the table to really make it worth it. All right, moving on to Feral Instinct. So much in the same way that Savage was a valuable power in the preponderance of matches, Feral Instincts is going to be your most valuable power in the rest of the matches. So anytime you're in a matchup where you're really concerned about the opponent's defense and you really need to make sure you get past that defense, this is what we're using to do it. This is our source of undefendable damage. The bond is great because we want bonds. We want to be able to heal Nera. We want to be able to put part of the damage that we take every turn into Nera. But most of all, we want undefendable damage. We want to be able to push damage through and not have to worry about getting hit back. With Nera up, this is 4 undefendable damage plus the ability to potentially heal Nera or split damage with her. To look at the upgrade on Feral Instincts, it costs 2. It increases your damage up to 3, and it gives you another unacceptably bad backup roll of Swipe, inflict a bleed on up to 3 different chosen opponents. Okay, I'll say this. If you play multiplayer, Swipe is a lot better. In 1v1 competitive, this is just not good. This is not a good ability. I don't want to use my whole turn to put bleed on you and then have you roll a 5 and basically I whipped. So this is marginally better than whipping, but not good. Multiplayer, it's a little bit better, still probably not good. Okay, focusing on the main power though, this increases the damage by 1, which doesn't seem like a lot. And in matchups where you don't care about your opponent's defense roll, you don't play this. You just sell it and you move on. In matchups where you really care about not having to deal with your opponent's defense, like Cursed Pirate, like Shadow Thief, like potentially Pyro, depending upon how the game's going, maybe you play this for the extra damage. It's got to be one of those matchups where Feral Instincts is like your go-to attack, and you got to have a surplus of coins and nothing else to spend them on. And even then, you're paying 2 combat points for the chance of 1 additional damage. You're going to have to attack with it at least 2 or 3 times to get your value back out of it. This is probably a sell. There are going to be times where this is playable. There are going to be times where the extra damage makes the difference. I think those times are going to be few, far between. You'd probably sell this card most of the time. This is a great power. Yes, the damage numbers are low. So this is the thing. I'm going to just take a second here. We're about halfway through the board. Let's just take a second and talk about Huntress in a little bit more general circumstances. All of these damage numbers are low. They're all low. Even with Nyra up, they're low. So you just have to accept that you're never going to win the damage race. You're never going to be the beatdown character who can really rush to the end with an outpouring of damage. You have to play kind of a more attrition game with your opponents. Now, we'll get to how Huntress does that in a second. Her defense is one of the most important powers on this board, but it's just important to keep in mind how low this damage is. It's very, very low. And even with the +2 damage that Nera gives you on all of these abilities, the damage numbers are still low. They're below average. So we need to keep that in mind with our strategy. It's really important to keep Nera up. It's really important that we don't give up that extra couple of damage every turn on all of our abilities. It's really important with her awkward die rolls that we have Nera with enough health surplus that we can occasionally use her to get that extra roll. These things are critical for Huntress. So while there are some characters who are very difficult to play and very thinky in terms of there's 3 options in front of you and 2 of them you're going to get punished, Huntress is that kind of character. You have to make sure you're choosing the right lines and making the right choices at every moment. And any slippage in that decision making is an opportunity for your opponent to pull ahead. This is not a character who can come from behind. So your decision making needs to be on point. And honestly, your luck kind of needs to be on point too, because her rolls are so awkward. So this is a character that can win games. I'm not saying Huntress is bad. Quite the opposite. Huntress has great potential, but her margin for user error is razor thin. There's some characters you can make multiple mistakes and still sometimes pull off a win because they're so linear. They don't kind of only do the one thing. Barbarian is a great example. This is a character that doesn't punish you for chasing the wrong powers. Uh, Huntress does. Huntress has very low tolerance for piloting mistakes. So if you're going to play Huntress in a competitive environment, you need to have your A game the whole time. One mistake, one bad turn with Huntress, one Nera going down in the wrong moment, and that can be the whole game right there. So, okay, let's move forward. Speaking of low damage numbers, let's look at a couple very disappointing Straits. So it is cool. I do like seeing characters that have both their Straits together on one ability. I'm sure Loki likes this. Yes, he gets more value out of his cancels with Spellbound, but this also means we get more overall options for this hero. And frankly, this hero needs more role objectives because they're all hard to get. So Straits are something with this character, you're never really excited for them. 4 damage plus a bleed. Even with Nera, that's still 6 plus a bleed. So the bleed has to proc at least once just to hit the floor of average damage, like what's acceptable. The large straight becomes 7 damage, becomes 9 plus 2 bleeds. So there's a little more potential with the large straight. But since you're not chasing straights with this hero, you're probably not going to be getting large straights very often. The small straight is probably going to be where you end up when you didn't hit the other things that you were going for. Neither of these powers are powers that I'm very excited about. Looking at the upgrades for the straights, our small straight goes up to 5 damage, our large straight goes up to 8, so that increases our potential to 7 and 10, which is like 10 damage on a large straight is good damage, but you have to have Nera up. You have to get the large straight. Um, I don't think you want to be rolling for straights with this hero anyway. Like there's no matchup where straights are going to be your go-to power. I think this is a pretty easy sell in my opinion. All right, moving down to Predatory Advance. So the thing about Predatory Advance is this is not your go-to power in any matchup, but it's going to be your second most used power in every matchup. So Predatory Advance is in this position where it's kind of a fallback role for both of our two main abilities that we care about, Savage and Feral Instincts. Depending upon matchup, Savage or Feral Instincts are going to be the main thing we want to attack the majority of the time. And Predatory Advance is just well positioned to be a fallback for both of those. So you're going to activate Predatory Advance a bunch. You're going to activate this probably more than you actually want to because it's like, man, I would have preferred to hit that Feral and done undefendable damage into this Cursed Pirate. So what does Predatory do? You heal Nera for 1 and you deal 5 damage. 5 becomes 7 if Nera is up. We're at the floor of what's acceptable damage on an ability. Huntress just does low damage numbers. Looking at the upgrade here, we have Jugular, which is yet another backup ability that is barely better than a whiff, marginally better than a whiff. Some percent of the time is exactly the same as a whiff. These backup abilities are not fair. Like they're mean. Like why even put them there? Looking at the upgrade on Predatory, you still hear Nera for 1 and your damage goes up to 6. Considering that we start at 5, this is not a huge upgrade. It costs 2. I've said it a bunch with this character. So many of these upgrades, you have to always run the math of the cost of the upgrade plus the fact that I'm not selling this card. So you could think of playing Predatory Advance 2 kind of like you're spending 3 combat points. Could you spend those combat points elsewhere? Do you have twice as wild? Do you have so wild plus 6 in? Do you have not this time? There's a lot of generic cards that are actually going to be more impactful on the game than this upgrade. So again, even though I have multiple times when talking about this hero said, hey, this ability is really important. You're going to activate it a lot, but I don't really think you should pay for the upgrade. That's the case here as well. I feel like most of the time you just sell this, even though you're activating this ability, you're only getting 1 more damage. So you're going to have to activate it like 2-3 times to get your value out of it. I think there are better things you could be doing with your combat points. So at least for me, I'm selling Predatory Advanced. Okay, so let's talk about Feral. Roll 4 6s. You heal Nera for 1. 5 undefendable or 7 undefendable if Nera is up. I mean, you take it if you get it, but I'm not excited about this power. This is just another power that falls victim to Huntress having generally very small attack values. Rough. All right, let's look at the upgrade. You pay 2, you heal Nera 1, and it becomes 6 undefendable damage. Ferocious heals Nera for 1 and inflicts 2 bleed. This is yet another backup ability that feels like it might as well be a whiff. This one, at least you get to heal Nera, I guess, so there's no chance that it's exactly as bad as a whiff, but you can't in a character that has this small amount of combat points, you can't be spending them on things like this, in my opinion. If you really love this upgrade, hey, God bless. I hope you roll sixes. But in my opinion, if you're trying to win competitive games, you can't invest in a card that does this little and is this hard to roll for. So this is maybe more of an auto sell than the basic attack was. All right. Here's where it all comes together, the maternal bond. So by default, we hit roll 3 dice. On a spear, we deal a damage. On a 5 or X5s, we heal Nyra. And if Nyra is active and we roll a 6, we deal 2 damage. So potentially 3 damage output. This is a scary defense for a bunch of heroes. We don't have enough damage to win games across our attack abilities, but we do damage on defense. This is a great defense. Yeah, you got to keep Nera up. Yeah, you can only deal 1 with the base version of it. All right, so let's take a look at the upgrade for Maternal Bond. Maternal Bond 2. This costs 3, which is really expensive. You get to roll a 4th die. It doesn't really change anything about how the power works, but it just increases the consistency of being able to get that damage output, which is what we really want. This is not the card I'm excited about, though. This is the card I'm excited about. Now, paying 4 to upgrade anything in Dice Throne, it's got to be an absolute banger. It has to be a game-winning ability if you're going to pay 4 for an upgrade. And Maternal Bond 3 does not let us down. So most importantly, maybe most importantly, it changes the on to X. And now it also counts sixes. So your ones, twos, and sixes all deal 1 damage. You can still heal Nera for any 5s you roll, and your 3s and 4s are now the target to deal damage with Nera. So our ability to deal damage gets better, and the ceiling actually increases. So potentially we could do as much as 5 damage back here. That's huge. This is the power that lets Huntress close the damage gap. The ability to consistently deal 3 damage, 5 damage back to the opponent while they're crashing into you is what makes the difference for Huntress in a lot of games. I think out of all the upgrades, if you can only play one upgrade, this is the one you want to play. This is the one that's going to make the most difference in your games. Maybe against a hero that you know is going to have a lot of undefendable attacks like Ninja, maybe you consider not playing it because it is very expensive and her economy is very throttled. So that would be the only time I would ever consider not playing this. And even against Ninja, I think you play it. You show the character that has the undefendable damage, hey, if you can't hit me undefendable, I'm going to turn your face into a ketchup sandwich every time you run into my awesome defense. And I think that's probably where you want to be. This card is fantastic. We're going to take a look at the ultimates. So we need a bunch of 6s always. Jungle Fury. Gain a bond, 2 bleeds, 12 damage, becomes 14 if you have Nera. It's fine. I mean, it's an ultimate. This looks like an ultimate. This is maybe the one place on her board where Huntress's damage values aren't suppressed due to the omniscience of Nera giving her attack buffs all the time. All right, so we're gonna move the board out of the way here and let's take a look at the rest of Huntress's card kit. So you pay 1, you get to roll 3 dice, and you can heal Nera some amount. You probably play this. This is cheap. Unlike a lot of Nera's upgrades, this is a cheap card, and it does something that's immediately important. Managing Nera's health pool is the most important skill for a Huntress player. You have to make full use out of that health pool. If your Nera is just sitting there at 7 health turn after turn, you're wasting the resource that you need to win the game. You need to be willing to deal the ping damage to Nera to re-roll a die to try to fix your awkward roll objectives. You need to be willing to spend those bonds aggressively to put as much damage into Nera turn after turn as you can while still keeping her up. So this is a card that helps you with what is, I think, the most important part of Huntress's game plan. I think this is a card you play almost every game. All right, Savage Slash, pay 1, roll a die, and you can inflict bleeds on people. I've been pretty down on bleed my entire time as a Dice Throne player. This is not a status effect I'm that excited about. I think if you play this, there's a chance you just throw away the card, the coin you could have gotten from selling the card, plus the cost of the card, and your opponent rolls a 5 and a 6 on their turn, and you get absolutely nothing out of it. As a player, I'm not interested in those kinds of propositions where I invest my resources and maybe they're absolutely worthless. Now, the odds are on the side that the bleeds are going to do a couple of points of damage before the bleeding gets stopped and they get them off of there. But man, I know thyself. As a player, if I invest in this card and my opponent immediately clears it and I get no value, I am on tilt. I do not like this card. I would sell this card almost every game. Resilient, pay 1, instant speed, gain a bond. This can save your life. This card says don't lose the game. If you would take fatal damage, instead don't. That's extremely good. It's extremely good. This is a card you're going to play in probably every game. It's really nice to fake your opponent out, make them think they've got an open lane to just push a big attack, and then boom, out of nowhere you get a bond, and that whole big attack ends up not making contact with your face. That can win games. So this is a great card. Pounce is an attack modifier like most heroes have. The difference here is Huntress pays nothing for hers, and she has a lower chance of actually rolling successful attack damage increase because there's only 2 spears. The 1 and the 2 are her only die faces to increase that damage. She does have a pretty decent chance to inflict that bleed, but we don't like bleed, so you're going to play this card. You always play these attack modifiers. Sometimes they do nothing. I feel better about playing this one than one of the ones that like cost me a combat point to even get it into play, and then I roll all 3s and 4s and get nothing. So as far as this style of attack modifier goes, this is one area where I actually think Huntress has like a better value proposition above what is like the typical type of this card. Prowl, 0 cost. Again, I love these 0 cost attack modifiers for a character like Huntress. You get to roll a die. You can add 1 damage. You can add 2 damage. You can heal, or you can add 3 damage. All of these results are good. Don't mismanage your board in such a way that Nyra is at full health when you play this. That would be really annoying. But this is definitely an attack modifier that you're going to play in every single game where you get it. There was never be a reason to sell this. There's always going to be value on the board, and it costs you nothing but the card in hand. Lastly, we're going to talk about the promo. Now, I fully acknowledge, while I do have kind of a competitive approach to these videos, promo cards are generally not allowed in a competitive setting. So this is like a little bones throw for its kitchen table players. Promo cards kind of all do the same thing. They cost 0. They're main phase. You roll a die, and if you get a 6, something really good happens. On any other outcome, you draw a card. Huntress's is the most realistic one. Like, some of these promo cards don't even feel like they were designed to be played in the 1v1 game. They're so wild. This one feels like this is a utility card that Huntress could have had in her default kit, and it would have been completely reasonable. So this one does a lot less on the upside than some of the other heroes, but yeah, you always play these. You always play these. I love the art on this one too. Let's talk about Huntress strategy in broad strokes. If you're playing against the Huntress, here's what you do. You don't play your dice fix cards on yourself. You only play them on her, and you force her to whiff. If you can force Huntress to whiff once, you're in really good shape. If you can force Huntress to whiff twice, you probably win that game. You want to get ahead early. You want to put down Nera as soon as possible. Huntress has a really hard time of coming from behind. So as long as you can get out to an early lead, generally you're going to be able to grind the Huntress out of those games. Now, in Dice Throne, everybody has an ultimate, and the ultimate is the ultimate equalizer. It's a great come from behind mechanic, but it's tough for that to be enough. It's hard. It's real hard to get to an ultimate, and if you're playing against Huntress and you're saving your dice fix cards specifically to deal with the potential ultimate that might get her out of a bad situation, you're probably going to be insulated against that. Now, if you're playing as Huntress, the most important skill you have to worry about is navigating Nera. This is critical. Knowing when she can go down, knowing that you have your hand set up so, well, okay, she's going down now, but as soon as turn passes, I'm going to be able to get her stood up next turn. Keeping Nera active is critical for Huntress to even put out average damage. Without Nera, Huntress is not going to win games. And that's fair. This is her core mechanic. If you forsake her core mechanic, you don't deserve to win games. So if Huntress appeals to you as a character, if this is a hero you want to get good with, this is the suite of strategy that you need to focus on. You need to know, when do I spend my bond, and do I spend it to split or do I spend it to heal? What is the timing? The biggest blowout play you can have against a Huntress, and the thing you as a Huntress player need to be ready for, is your opponent putting a huge attack together, declaring it at you, and when you go to spend your bond, they say bye-bye, because if I'm attacking you, my bye-bye gets to resolve before your bond gets to resolve because I'm the attacking player. Whichever player has priority gets to choose when two simultaneous effects happen. That is a blowout. That is like the buying the shadows off the Shadow Thief when he thought he was safe. Those are the kind of things that you can lose the game on the spot if you end up in that situation. Of course, the big brain play is after they throw out that bye-bye, you just throw out Resilient and gain the bond right back. That would be awesome. So that's something you really, really need to pay attention to. You also need to determine basically from turn one what your strategy is to win with Huntress. You need to identify, is this a hero who I can crash into their defense and be okay? In that case, you're probably going to go towards Savage with a fallback of Predatory. Is this a hero that has a really nasty defense that could kill me if I run into it too much and I need to avoid it as much as possible? Okay, well, then in that case, you're going to go Feral with a fallback of Predatory with potentially a splash of Resuscitate or some small Straits thrown in there. And that's going to be the overall texture of most of your Huntress games. Decide what you're doing early, manage Nyra's life pool obsessively. Managing her life pool doesn't mean keeping it high. It means using it as a resource. Surfing that ebb and flow of Nyra's HP is what's going to get you the W's with Huntress, in my opinion. So in conclusion, who is the Huntress for? Well, there's two ways to answer that. First, if you like the idea of a hero who works together with their ferocious pet to stalk down prey and take them out with this jungle-based teamwork, then this is a flavor home run for you. This is a hero where you really do kind of get the vibe that you're working together with Nera to frustrate your opponent's attacks. Maybe no more perfectly than when they declare a big attack and you're able to turn it into a tiny attack because of Nera interaction. Secondly, if you're the kind of player who mechanically likes the idea of having to make a lot of high consequence, unclear choices throughout the course of the game, managing additional resources, more resources than some of the other heroes ask of you, and kind of making up for a slower paced offense with a vicious defense, if these kind of play patterns appeal to you, then mechanically this character is going to be a home run for you. So regardless of whether you fall neatly into one of those camps or you just enjoy great dice throwing design, Huntress is going to get it done in those kinds of ways. And Huntress, one of the most beautiful characters in the entire game. The art, the concept of having this cat companion that hunts alongside you, all of this appeals to me greatly. The things about Huntress that I stub my toe on a little bit are the really awkward roll objectives. The number of times I've just been frustrated because the dice just don't want to cooperate. Like, I have a great game plan and the dice just don't want to cooperate. So you're not going to be able to use your dice fix cards as Huntress to mess with your opponent very often because of how awkward your rolls are. But I've still put in literally hundreds of games with this hero. So as always, huge thumbs up for all of the character design within Dice Throne. Okay, that's all we got today. I'm Mr. Ben. This has been the Build Phase. Go win some games.